I definitely consider one of the most fascinating things about Sefer Shoftim the people that are in the stories, not so much the major figures, but the medium ones, or even the ones that are really minor. And so today I'm going to talk about one of the ones that is kind of like almost a major figure, Yael. She's not the heroine, but she's almost a major figure. And then somebody who's just mentioned almost like an afterthought at the very end, and that, of course, is the mother of Sisera. Two vastly different people, obviously, and yet they are people that give us, women, yes, that give us, I think, some very sophisticated ideas to think about. Seriously, sophisticated ideas to think about. And who is this Yael? Who is this Yael? Don't answer. That was a rhetorical question. At any rate, who is she, and what do we learn from this Yael? Well, I have to tell you something. What we learn is very confusing in a certain manner, but then we have to remember that life is very confusing sometimes. Life gets very complicated sometimes. Sometimes we make decisions, and it's not between something that is clearly correct and something that is clearly incorrect, or something that is clearly good for us or good for the world, and something that is clearly not good for us and not good for the world, but rather we sometimes need to make decisions between things that are a little shaded, whether we do it or not. And sometimes we have to make that decision very, very quickly, on the spur of the moment. And that is really what Yael did. So, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the beginning and reacquaint ourselves with who this Yael is. Who is this person that Devorah in Hashirah praises so greatly, equating her literally to the Imahot, when she says, Tevorach min Hashim Yael, Eshet Chaver Hakeni, min Hashim ba'ohel Tevorach. Yael, the wife of Chaver Hakeni, should be blessed, should be thanked more than the Nashim ba'ohel. And one understanding, we'll get to another one, is that Nashim ba'ohel are the women that are associated with 10, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Well, the story, Am Yisrael, towards the beginning of the time of the Shoftim, are engaged in a major battle with the Canaanite army, the army of Yavin Melech Canaan, the general of whose army is a certain Sisera, who is well known for being a major technician. He's a very good general, and he's known to be victorious in all of his battles. However, he is currently suffering a defeat by the hands of Barak and, of course, Devorah herself. He runs away from the battlefield in a cowardly move to save himself, remember? And if you'll follow in the sources, we are told, it's actually the second source you have, V'Sisra nas baraglav, Sisera fled on foot, El Ohel Yael, Eshet Chaver Hakeni, to the tent of Yael, the wife of Chaver Hakeni, Ki Shalom ben Yavin Melech Hatzor, Uvein Beit Chaver Hakeni. Because he felt good running there because there was peace, some kind of treaty between the king of Chatzor and the Keni, the house of Chaver Hakeni. So he sees a tent And I'm sure you understand that not everybody lived in tents. It was unusual for people to live in tents at this time. They lived in houses. They lived in stone houses. And he saw a tent, and he knew that the tent belonged to the Canaanite, and he was safe. He was going to go run there. Meanwhile, we have already been introduced to this Chever HaKeni in that Perek, in Perek Dalid, in Sefer Shoftim, a few psukim back, and if you remember, it kind of comes out of the ether. We're told the story of Devorah, and in the middle of the story, apropos of seemingly nothing, we're told, it's Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'chever HaKeni nifrad mikayin. Very interesting. We're told about a certain Chever HaKeni, that is his name, who separated himself from his nation. His nation were all living in the south. And this Milchama is taking place up in the Beit Shan area. And all of the Canaanite lived around Yericho and Drom Har Chevron, that area. He separated himself from them. And it says Mikayin, and there is an opinion that they descended from Kayin. We're not sure, though. It could have been the name of the nation. Mibnei Chovav Chotein Moshe. And we have a throwback, a historical throwback, because we're told that this Chever HaKeni is a descendant of, what's the other name for Chovav that we know? Yitro, thank you. He's a descendant of Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe. Vayet oholo adalon b'tzananim asheret kedesh. And he pitched his tent up north, right near where the battle had been taking place, in the area of Kedesh. He separated himself. He wanted to live more north, and we have the fact that this tent is right in the middle of the area, not far from the battlefield, and we're told that she is too, Yael, a descendant of Yitro. So let's throw ourselves back. When is the last time we heard anything about Yitro? It is way back in the Torah, right? We haven't heard anything about him in Yehoshua. Yes, we did. Not him, but his descendants, excuse me. Not really in Yehoshua, but in the time of Yehoshua, it appears in Sefer Divrei Hayamim. But what was the last thing we really learned about Yitro? So we go back to the time shortly before Matan Torah, the beginning of Parshat Yitro, when Yitro comes to Moshe, remember, with Tzipporah, with the two children, and he presents himself to Moshe. And the next day, he observes, as Moshe is teaching, the people are coming to him, and he's teaching them, and he's giving them advice, and they're coming to him with questions. And he says, Moshe, Navol Tibol, you're going to fall apart, you can't do this on your own. And he gives them some very good advice, if you remember. Yes, yes. And he gives him some very good advice, and Moshe follows that advice. And I didn't put this source down on your paper, I apologize. However, and please listen, you know it, it's very familiar. We have in Shmot Perek Yudchet, the beginning of Parshat Yitro, before we learn about Matan Torah, Vayishma Moshe lekol chotno. And Moshe listened to the voice of his father-in-law, Vaya'as kol asher amar. And he did everything that he told him. Vayivchar Moshe anshe chayil. Remember, Moshe chose men of accomplishment. Mikol Yisrael. Vayitein otam roshim al ha'am. He got people from all the nation, and he made them leaders of the nation, and he made them Sorei. 1 minute, I lost my place. Here we go. Sorei alafim v'sorei meot, sorei chamishim v'sorei asarot. He made them leaders over thousands, over hundreds, over 50, and over 10. In other words, there was a guy who's in charge of 10 people. If he couldn't answer the question, they went to the guy above him. who was in charge of 50, etc., etc., etc. In other words, Yitro had told Moshe, get yourself some help, appoint some people who are sharp and able, and they will help you, and it'll be easier for you because they'll take the questions and hopefully save you a little bit of time. And then it tells us, V'shavtu et ha'am, they'll judge the people, b'chol eit, anytime, all the time, they will be the judges. Et hadavar hakasha yaviyun el Moshe, that which is difficult, any question that's difficult, they'll bring to Moshe. V'chol hadavar hakatan yishpetuhem, and every small thing, they'll judge. And then it tells us, Vayishlach Moshe et chotno. We need that line. That's why I had to do that little section. And Moshe sent his father-in-law away. Vayelech lo el artso. And he went to his people. But he didn't go right away. It just doesn't give us a timeline here. It tells us Moshe listened to him and he went, but we know that he stayed almost a year with Moshe. And Old Pam?
Was he there for Matan Torah?
No, he heard. We don't know. That's a very good question. There's a disagreement.
Because he became
That's what I'm getting to. She's
So,
did he not hear? Either he heard about it. Remember at the very beginning of Parshat Yitro, there is one of those chronological problems as to when exactly Yitro came. Was it before Matan Torah or was it after? Yes.
I just always find that question hard to understand because it's inconceivable to me that most of our men would not have his children.
Oh, whoa. Loaded. Ellen, that's really a loaded question. How could it be that he would not have his children? That's a loaded question because we can't. I want to tell you something. I'm willing to analyze Yael, but I'm not willing to analyze Moshe Rabbeinu. But the question, Yitro came, yes. The question is, if it was before Matan Torah, then what was Moshe talking to the people about when he was judging them? What questions were they asking him? It had to be after Matan Torah when they started learning some of the things, or was it not? Were they there actually for Matan Torah? That's what Chazal are asking. And that's where we get a little bit confused about time. But one thing we know is that in Bamidbar, in Parshat Balotcha, we do learn a very interesting pasuk, which is Perek Yud, Vayomer Moshe lechovav, another name for Yitro, lechovav ben Reuel hamidjani choten Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, nosim anachnu el hamakom asher amar Hashem oto atein lachem. We're traveling to the place that Hashem promised, I'm going to give you. L'cha itanu v'heitavnu lach. Come with us, and we'll do good to you. Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael, because Hashem spoke good things. He promised us good things. They are about ready to make their first journey from Har Sinai. Almost a year after Matan Torah. They are about ready to make their first journey, and Moshe turns to Yitro, who is still there, and says to him, you're coming with us, aren't you? We're going into Eretz Yisrael. Vayomer elav lo elech. And strangely, Yitro says to him, I'm not going to go. Ki im el artzi ve'el moladati elech. But rather, I am going to go back to my land and my birthplace. Vayomer al na ta'azov otanu. Very interesting. Moshe says to him, please don't leave us. Ki al kain yodata chanotenu bamidbar. Because you know all our camping places in the midbar. V'hayita lanu la'einayim. Either past tense, you were an eyewitness, or future, you can be a guide. You'll be our einayim. You know the midbar. You can be our guide. V'haya ki telechi manu, and it will be if you come with us. V'haya hatov hachu, asher yetiv Hashem imanu v'heitavnu lach. We promise you that the good that Hashem is promising us, we will add you to the good. And basically the Mefarshim say that maybe Moshe was afraid that Yitro thought maybe that as a ger, he won't be accepted, he wouldn't have a nachala. And Moshe says, no, Hashem promised us, all of us will have a nachala, including the gerim that join us, yes. I think that's true. He was trying to make him feel that he was needed, I think. In this case. I don't know for sure, but I think so. At any rate, what I wanted to share with you a very interesting medrash on this entire situation. It is a mechilta. Mechilta is the medrash halacha on Sefer Shemot, Parshat Yitro. And we have that pasuk that I said we needed before, Vayishlach Moshe et chotno, that he sent him away. In other words, from the Shemot we know that Yitro didn't stay despite the fact that Moshe was begging him and making him feel good. So he left. We know that from Shemot. Rav Yoshua Omer, you have that in your sources. Shalcho b'kavodo shalolam, he sent him, giving him great kavod, extremely great kavod. Rav Elazar HaModai Omer, Rav Elazar HaModai says, Natan lo matanot rabot, he gave him many gifts. Shemitoch tshuva shenatan lo atalamed, because we learn a lot from the answer that Yitro gave him, which we don't have spelled out. Notice. Shenemar and Bamidbar Yud, the other thing we just read, the other source, Al nata azov otanu, please don't leave us. Amarlo, you should have it. I will tell you the number. One moment. It is number 2, and I just came to third line. Amar lo, ata natata lanu eitza tova. You got it? Third line. Ve'etza yafa. You gave us very good advice and a very pleasant piece of advice. V'hamakom hodel lidvarecha. And even HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself agreed to your words. Al na ta'azov otanu. So please, don't leave us. Amar lo, excuse me, Yitro said to him, Klum haner mahaneh ela b'makom hachashuch. Yitro said to him, isn't it true that a candle only gives pleasure in the dark? If you light a candle, it doesn't help you much in the light, does it? If it's light, like we put a candle on the table, it wouldn't make a difference in what we can see in this room. But if it would be dark in this room, then that little candle would help us see several things in the room and identify them. V'chima haner mahaneh bein chama ulevana. And what good does a candle do when it's standing between the sun and the moon? Ata chama, Yitro saying to Moshe, you are the sun, v'Aharon achicha levana, and Aharon, your brother, is the moon. Maya aser haner beinehem. What good can the candle do between them? Ella, but rather, hareini holech la'artzi. I am going to go back to my nation. Va'agayer l'chol b'nei medinati. And I am going to convert all the people in my country. Va'aviem l'talmud Torah. And I will bring them to learning Torah. Ve'ekorveim tachat kanfei hashchina. And I will bring them close under the wings of the Shekhinah, the spirit of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yitro was saying, there is no specific good I can do here. You and Aharon are certainly capable leaders. Yitro was an extremely intelligent person who was accustomed to leadership. He said, I can't be a leader here. I'm going to go back to my nation, and there I am going to take a leadership role. I am going to convert all of them. I will tell them the importance of learning Torah, and I will bring them close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yachol shehalach v'lo asa? Is it possible that he went and didn't do what he promised? Ella, Talmud Lomar, we learn in Sefer Shoftim, our Sefer Perek Aleph, Uvnei Keni, Chotein Moshe, the descendants of Chotein Moshe, the children of the Keni, Olu Me'ir Tmarim, came up north a little bit from the city. Ir Tmarim is Yericho. Ir Tmarim, the city of dates, is Yericho. They came up from Yericho. Do you remember why they came up? Vayomer, Vayelech, Vayeshev et ha'am, and he went and he dwelt with the nation. And you know what that means? He went, they came to learn with the first shofet, Otniel ben Knaz. Because just before this pasuk appears, we learn about the daughter of Kalev. We have another wonderful figure, that Achsa. She's wonderful. Achsa, Aleph, Chaf, Samach, Hey, who is the daughter of Kalev, whom he marries, makes a nice little shidduch, with Otniel ben Knaz, the first shofet. And she's worried that, oh yeah, he's a Talmid Chacham, but what about making a living? What about, is he going to be able to support a family correctly? And so she begs her father, she falls off her, remember, Vatiznach me'al hachamor. It's a Rivka comparison. She falls off her donkey and says to him, you gave me deep waters, meaning you gave me a Talmid Chacham, but I also need surface waters that really provide that which a family needs. And Kalev grants her a piece of land in the area. And so he is called, Otniel ben Knaz is also called Yavetz. And it's talking about these descendants, right after the story of Achsa, these descendants of Yitro, the Keni, coming to learn Torah with Yavetz, with Otniel ben Knaz. So in other words, the proof that Yitro did indeed convert his nation, we hear in the beginning of Sefer Shoftim Perek Aleph, and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in Divrei Hayamim it is told even more clearly, which is quoted here, Umishpachat Sofrim, a family of Sofrim, actual Talmidei Chachamim, Yoshvei Yavetz, those who sat with Yavetz, which means they learned with Yavetz. And then there's Tiratim, Shematim, Sukkotim, a whole bunch of names. And the Midrash tells us why they're called these names, because they came to listen, because they came to learn. They wanted to be with Am Yisrael, with the leader of Am Yisrael at the time, Otniel ben Knaz, otherwise known as Yavetz. So basically, the whole rest of the Midrash is telling us proof that that they did indeed learn Torah and come close to Hashem and move up north, despite the fact that their father Yitro, when he did convert the whole nation, did give them some instructions. And the reason I'm telling you this orally is because we need to know a perek in Yirmiyahu where we meet a Yonadav ben Rechav. And Rechav was one of the earliest descendants of Yitro, who tells Yirmiyahu, our father commanded us to be part of Am Yisrael, but to keep an individual identity, to always live in tents, and to live in enclaves of our own. And what we see is they stayed in enclaves, but they did move in. What this Mechilta is telling us, they started moving in to be closer to Am Yisrael. So we can imagine, keeping an individual identity is all well and good, but it does make you feel very individual and very alone. And I'm assuming that maybe this Yael did feel a little bit different. I'm assuming that's me. I haven't seen it anyplace, but I'm making this assumption. But now we have her background. We have who she is, and the fact that it would seem that there was some kind of peace treaty. In other words, the king of Chatzor had nothing to do with the descendants of Cani on the whole, because they lived in the south and he was busy in the north conquering the area. But at any rate, we have a whole bunch, I gave you a whole bunch of these sources that we've now discussed, and we have an interesting Ralbag on Shoftim, on the psukim we're doing now, which you have in, I think it's 4, no, it's 5. 5. V'hinei zachar, shechever hakeni haya nifrad mikayin, mibnei chovav chotein Moshe. It mentioned that he had separated himself from the rest of his nation. Shesiper lamala sheyashvu et Yehuda b'midbar Yehuda, because we learned above in Perek Aleph that they lived in the south, in Midbar Yehuda. V'nata ahalo ad elan b'tzananim asher et Kadesh, and he came up north here where the battle was and pitched his tent in the area of Kadesh. V'yoreh poal Yael. If I'm giving you a lot of sources and you're saying, what is she doing? It's because I'm trying to prove something to you, mipi chazal. It's teaching us the way Yael worked. I will tell you exactly what I'm getting to. Sheminhag chever hakeni, the minhag, the way of life, the custom of this chever hakeni, hayok minhan sha'ar b'nei chovav, was exactly the way all of the descendants of Yitro acted. Lehitnaheg b'dat Yisrael. Here's what I wanted you to hear. Whether you took it for granted until now or not, they all acted according to halacha. They accepted Dat Yisrael. My friends, what I am saying to you is that Yael is a Jewish woman in every sense of the word. She did have the minhag of her people to live in tents and not in houses, but the Ralbag is at pains to make sure that we understand that she accepted upon herself Dat Yisrael. Vilazeh, and for that reason, Hishtadla Yael laharog et Sisera. And that's why she really felt that it was very important for her to kill Sisera, because he was tormenting her people, Am Yisrael. V'amnam haya shalom bein chever hakeni uvein Sisera. But even though, despite, in truth, there was peace between Chever Hakeni's family and Sisera, Nevertheless, im heyot hamilchama bein Sisera uvein Yisrael. Nevertheless, if Sisera is fighting against Yisrael, the Ralbag is telling us, then Yael felt that her loyalties had to be with Am Yisrael. And so that puts us smack in the middle of what happened here, in the middle of the story, because Yael was called upon to make an important decision in a split second. Yes, there's peace between Sisera, but this is a battle for existence, an existential battle between the Sisera and Am Yisrael, and I really need something. I need to do something right now. And we know the story. We know the story. We just don't know exactly. We know that she invited Sisera into her ohel. We know that she fed him warm milk when he asked for water so that he would get sleepy, so that she would be able to do something. And we know that she then took a tent peg and she hammered it into his skull. And it tells us, by the way, Vatitznach ba'aretz, it went through the skull and into the ground, but it did it on its own. Because even though Yael knew how to use a tent peg, sorry to tell you, but the women used to pitch the tents in those days. It was the women's job, one of the women's jobs. They did the dishes and they pitched the tents. And yeah, and they knew how to get a tent peg into the hard, rocky soil of the north of Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, she could have never have done it if she didn't have a little nace to help her. At any rate, we see she invited him in because we can make a comparison between the way she talks to Sisera and the way she talked to Boaz. When she talked to Sisera, and go ahead, it's source 6 on the bottom of the page. Vateitzei Yael ekrat Sisera, vatomer elav. That vateitzei is she went out. She didn't hide in the tent. She went out towards him, and she said, Surah Adonai, Surah Elai. Yes, it's meant to be seductive. There's no question. Surah, come over. Surah Elai, she says, not to my tent. She says, Surah Elai, come to me. Al tira, don't be afraid. Vayasar elaha ohela. And he came with her to the tent. Vatechasehu basmicha. And she covered him with a smicha, which we are not sure what that smicha is. We'll talk about it in a minute, not right this minute, because we are going to skip the next source, and we're going to go to the one right after that. V'hinei Barak rodef et Sisera. And a few minutes later, Barak was chasing to find where Sisera is. Vateitzei, and she goes out again. Likrato. Vatomer lo lech. She said to him, lech, go. She didn't say surah. She said, go. Continue. Because v'ar'eka et ha'isha asher ata mevakesh. I will show you the man that you are seeking. Vayavo eleha, and he came to her. V'hinei Sisera nofel mate, v'yated barakato. And Yitra was fallen dead, and the yated, the tent peg, was in his temple. What are we to make about this story? In simple English, what really happened in that ohel? Chazal have both sides of the story covered. On the one hand, you know that radak that I skipped? I skipped a little radak. It is, where was it? It should be, it's the top, number 7, true. It is the top, Amar Rish Lakish, Rish Lakish says, Chazarnu b'chol mikra. We've looked through the entire Torah, the entire written Torah. V'lo matzanu kli sheshmo smicha. And we haven't found a kli, a utensil that's called a smicha. There is a smicha with a samach. But look at this, it doesn't have a samach. It has a sin. We haven't found this. Ella mahu smicha. So Reish Lakish says, what did she cover? What is a smicha? Beshin. That's spelled with a sin, actually. Smicha klomar. Shmi hu kan. Smicha. Shmi hu kan. Read it as though it has a shin. My name is here. Shemeid al Yael shelo nagaba Sisera. It's like Hashem is saying, I'm putting my name here. Shmi kan, shmi ko, smicha. That he didn't, that Rasha, that Sisera didn't touch her. In other words, everything that went on in that ohel was fine, acceptable. Yes, she did seductively call him in, but nothing happened there. And yet, Chazal also point to one pasuk in the Shirah, which is devastating, utterly devastating, graphic and harsh, which says, Bein ragleha kara nafal v'shachav. Look at those words. Between her feet, between her legs, he bent, right? Kara, he bent, nafal, fell, shachav, and lay down. Bein ragleha kara nafal. Ba'asher kara sham nafal shadud. It tells us twice that he bent down between her legs. It's very graphic. When I used to teach Shoftim to 5th grade, back in the olden days, it was a long time ago, I taught it to 5th grade, and I used to, with a straight face, translate Bein ragleha, not as between her legs, but at her legs he fell. Remember, it was in America where you translate. And I davened every time I taught it that there wouldn't be one smart kid in the class that would say, Mrs. Borow, but Bein ragleha doesn't mean at her feet. Nobody ever did. I was lucky. Nobody ever did. I said, Bein ragleha at her feet. He fell. But it's very graphic, and Chazal say it's repeated, and then it says Sham Nafal Shadud. 7 times he had relations with her. 7 times he forced her. He raped her. We are very aware of this type of thing today in our present world. It's very interesting that the reaction of Chazal to this story is very mixed. On the one hand, he didn't touch her. On the other hand, 7 times. We have in the Talmud Bavli in Nazir, you have the source also. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Gidola Aveira Lishma, Mi Mitzvah Shelo Lishma. Did you ever hear that expression? Rabbi Nachman says it. It is greater to do an Aveira when you're doing it for the right purpose. Can you imagine this statement? Than when you're doing a mitzvah not for the correct intention. But then right away, yes?
The same thing happened to the daughter of the Kohen Gadol, Yehudit. Okay? She was raped by a
Halif
general.
Halif.
She killed him. And
Yes.
Yehudit killed him.
Yes, and
After she was raped.
that's right.
And it's saying it happened also to Esther.
Oh, I was going to bring that up.
Esther.
Thank you, Esther, because it's Purim.
Deliberately knew that she was going to be raped.
She was good.
But
Yes?
She did it to save Am Yisrael.
Oh,
Only to save Am Yisrael. Otherwise, she never would have done it.
you're right.
Only to save Am Yisrael.
You're absolutely.
Pikuach nefesh.
Oh.
That's why she did it. Pikuach nefesh doche
Everything. Okay.
So she did
And
Piyena.
yes,
Pikuach nefesh.
isn't that interesting? But let's go on with the Gemara. We have a problem. The Gemara isn't finished.
Different women.
Va'omer Rabbi Omer ha'amar, and it's true that Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, La'olam ya'asok adam b'torah u'v'mitzvot afilu shelo lishman. And Rabbi Yehuda says, wait a minute. Wait. Because don't we learn that you should do Torah and mitzvot even if it's not for the right purpose? Because if you do it maybe for the wrong purpose, you might learn to do it for the right purpose. So again, we have a mixed reaction. We have a very mixed reaction. Do you know, we all know the Eshet Chayil, right? The Eshet Chayil. There is the Yud letter in the Eshet Chayil, in Perek Lamed Aleph of Mishlei, which I did not put in on your sheet, because I decided to include it after I sent the sheet in. Yodeha Shilcha Bakishor, the Eshet Chayil. I did put it in? Yay! How intelligent of me. I didn't even remember that I put it in. I'm sorry. At any rate, Yodeha Shilcha Bakishor v'kapeha tomchu pelach. She sent out her hand to the spindle. In other words, the Eshet Chayil knows how to spin. We know that whenever Chazal talk about spinning, and what Shlomo was saying, spinning is a woman doing her job correctly. Spinning talks about everything that a woman is supposed to do in the house correctly, that she is in charge of the atmosphere. Because spinning is like planning ahead. You spin a tale, right? However, the Medrash Mishlei says, so interesting, Yadeha Shilcha Bakishor, Zo Yael. We're talking about Yael. Shelo Harga et Sisera B'klei Zayin, who didn't use a regular weapon of war to kill Sisera, Ela Biyated, B'koach Yadeha, but she used the 10-peg with the strength of her own hands. Umipnei ma lo hargato b'klei zayin. Why didn't she take a sword? She could have just taken a sword. He was fast asleep. In all the artist's renditions, his sword is lying right there. L'kayem ma shene'emar, to fulfill that which is stated in the Torah, lo yihyeh kli gever al isha. A woman is not supposed to use a masculine utensil. She shouldn't put on masculine clothing, remember? And so Yael is very careful. The Medrash Mishlei is telling us Yael is so careful that while she's worried about what she's doing and worried about whether it's right and whether she'll be able to do it, she also says, and I imagine it, I really can see it, she's saying, if I take his sword, I might not be able to kill him. But I know how to use a 10-peg. I've done this for years. I'm going to take that 10-peg, and I will hope that I have enough strength. Interestingly, there's an observation in Ruth Rabbah. Not only do we have a connection to Esther, because Esther also was forced to go into the palace. However, there's a comment here. Vayhi b'mei shvot HaShoftim. Remember the way Megillat Ruth starts? It was at the time that the Shoftim judged. Oy lador sheshaftu et shoftehem. The Medrash goes on to say, woe is to the generation that judged their judges. Vayhi b'mei shvot HaShoftim. It was in the days that people judged their judges. They didn't consider them, they didn't give them credit for truly being leadership material. Oy lador sheshoftehem tzrichim lihishafet. Woe is to the generation whose leaders, whose shoftim, need to be judged, deserve to be judged. V'gam el shofteim lo shama'u. It tells us that they didn't listen to their shoftim. Umi hayu. Who were the shoftim that didn't deserve, perhaps, to be shoftim, that were criticized by the people? And so there are many examples. It starts with Dvorah u'Barak hayu, of all people. Dvorah and Barak were criticized. Rav Yoshua ben Levi Amar Shamgar ve'Ehud, two shoftim, the third and the fourth, that were not among the greatest. And also, Dvorah ve'Yael hayu. Another opinion is that Yael was a shofet. And what they are saying is, there's a problem here. Why two women? Omar Ravacha, and Ravacha said, Dvorah u'Barak ve'Yael hayu. It's Dvorah, Barak, and Yael because it says, Shvot HaShoftim. Shoftim is double. Shvot, we're talking about a time that there were three judges. They're not saying that women are not good leaders, no. They are saying woe is to a generation where A, everybody criticizes the leaders, and B, to a generation where we don't see the men taking a leadership role. Remember at the beginning of the story when Devorah goes to Barak and says, Barak, didn't Hashem say that we have to fight the enemy? And he says, if you go with me, I'll go. And she says, ooh, if you want me to go, I'll go. But I want you to know that the Yeshua will happen at the hands of a woman. And Chazal is saying this was a generation that many of the men did not come. Remember in Shira Dvorah, she mentions Shvatim that did not come to help in this battle. It was a harsh time. There's an opinion in the Gemara, I could not find the source, and that's why you don't have it, but I remember it, that Chever Hakeni had to give Yael a divorce after this incident because she invited him into the tent and said surah. Compared to Esther, who according to Chazal was married to Mordechai, but they say it's different because she was forced. And anyway, they did probably divorce because we know that Esther stayed in the palace. Esther never got to go free again. We see her show up midrashically in Sefer Nehemiah, where she is the queen mother, sitting with Daryavesh, the next king, who's also called Artaxashta. And we see her sitting there. So she stayed with Achashverosh. And if she was married to Mordechai, she left. So we have Devorah praising her greatly. We have a story of somebody who doesn't completely shine, but who doesn't completely, she is not completely tarnished at all. She is considered a good woman who listened to her husband, which is very high praise. And how shall we conclude, my friends? Shall we say that one must act when opportunity presents itself? Shall we say it's too dangerous? Because we might not have time to weigh all the alternatives, all the alternatives. Sometimes when we make choices, as we mentioned at the beginning, in real life, then those choices are not 100% one way or another. But we make the best choice that we can. Do I have to end now? I do have to end now. So very quickly, let me just give you, because I really do not want to take anybody's time, chas v'chalila. The story of Sisera's mother, I'm going to tell you very quickly because I will not take anyone's time. It's interesting